Hey yo, welcome to the Godcast.
I hope y'all are buckled up, because things are about to get weird.
I don't understand why you chose me.
You want to change the world, son. So do I.
Where are we at in terms of history on the timeline? Where are we exactly? I'm just trying to uncover the truth and bring forth what I can see as the truth. The Bible seemed to be predicting more things than any other conspiracy theory type information, Look, one thing's for certain, that there is so much power in the name of Jesus Christ. That I know for sure.
Welcome to Godcast.
Welcome to Godcast.
The Goodness Over Darkness.
The Goodness Over Darkness podcast.
Here is your host.
Here's your host.
Here's your host,
Emmanuel Kingman.
Emmanuel Kingman.
Welcome to the light.
Welcome to the light.
Welcome to the light.
It's showtime. What is going on, everybody? What just happened? Why did it cut out like that? All right, there it is. It's back. I don't know why it stopped like that. That was weird. But anyway, hello, everybody.
Roll with it.
I'm your host, Emmanuel Kingman, and with me is my perfect sidekick equal. I am her sidekick, Mimi.
Hello.
Hello, my love. How are you?
Getting tired.
Your hair's...
Is it crazy? With
No,
the
no.
headphones?
Let's just... Yeah, a little headphone crazy. That's
Whatever.
all. So today's...
That's why I'm over here, not in the camera.
You should be on camera.
Not like this.
People want to see you. They do. So today's special guest was Mark Steeves, Mark Palmer Steeves
Who
from
is slowly becoming my new book dealer.
from the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast, the creative mind behind the Alt Media United cooperative, podcasting cooperative that I am a part of. I keep forgetting to mention that in the other intros, but I am on altmediaunited.com. You guys can find me there, as well as many, many other very excellent podcasts. Mark is bringing people together, and he is turning Mimi onto a lot of books, apparently.
Yes.
Oh, and you
Well,
do get to see
I
Mimi
went
in
back
this if
through
you
my
guys
notes.
if you guys want to. You get to see through Mimi. You get to see words floating in the air.
My shirt happens
under
to be
her
green
head.
on the green screen. Sorry about that.
Yeah, but the words were white and your head is not green. So
I can't find the notes I was reading when we were
what notes?
on with.
Watch, you're gonna knock your mic.
I got it. Anyway, the book that I got, I'm not going to say what it is yet, but I
don't know why she's talking.
wrote it down. The last time we had talked to him, I wrote down so much information because he must have shown this same book to me the first time we had him on. And
this is the first time we've had him on.
No, I've seen him on a round table, so I got it from somewhere that I wrote notes on his
You
books.
weren't there for the psychedelic round table. I was on his podcast.
Then maybe that's where I got it.
I don't think he showed us a book. And she
Listen,
won't
this
even
is
tell
why
me
I
what
have
book it is,
notes.
so I can
Whether he's on someone's
confirm
show
or
or
deny.
someone's on his show, I am here writing notes when I'm not working. So for some reason, I had the same book written twice, and that's why I'm going to get it.
It's
and
time
I'm gonna
travel.
read it.
It's time travel.
Yes. All right, let's get into the conspiracy definition we were talking about here.
All right. So you wanted to get into the word conspiracy. We started breaking it down in this. Sorry, folks, we're having a little technical difficulties because I screwed something up. So I had to pause the recording. But anyway, so we are talking about the word conspiracy, breaking it down here.
Yeah, he was breaking down the root of con, and when he defined it as with, that gave me a whole new perception on what we were talking about earlier this week when I had that meditation about Kanye changing his name to just Ye.
Yeah, from
It got me
Khan.
thinking, breaking down his name, Khan and Ye, but I didn't think of Khan to mean with, with you. And now he's just you, I am with you or I am you. And now I went to originally like the bad definition, swindle or against, like a con man. So it changed my perception of what I thought his name change was all about.
It's interesting.
So I don't know which way I want to go, but I do think that in some way, some weird way, Kanye changing his name to Ye, it just proves that, we are a reflection of each other.
Well, I'm not sure. I don't really have an opinion on Kanye one way or another.
I'm just
at the
not even
moment.
saying him as a person. I'm just saying him as I don't know how I would say it.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't have an opinion because I can see both sides of it. I can see obviously that it seems very not up to snuff on certain things, but I can also see how people are being judgmental and just not understanding where he's coming from. If him, Marilyn Manson, and Justin Bieber, if they were all MK Ultra victims and they have all come to Christ, it can appear that it's something that it's not. I don't know what's anything's possible. I mean, I've had my
think he
transformation.
is a very misunderstood person.
Well, that's neither here nor there.
I think he is actually awake or awakening, at least.
All right, but anyway, let's talk. We didn't talk to Kanye. We talked to
but we were
Mark.
talking about the breakdown of the word.
Yeah, so we broke down the word con right in the episode, and then I wanted you to break down that. But this episode, because I needed to know what we talked about.
Oh,
I'm just kidding.
did you?
I'm just kidding. I don't have notes. But anyway, this was a really fun episode. We talked about some Tartaria type of stuff, which was very interesting. The more people, Mark mentioned a couple different, I don't want to say field trips, little adventures that he's gone on. I talked about mine a little bit as well. Well, ours, St. Augustine, the Georgia Guidestones, going to Virginia, these little field exercises, I'll call them, not field trips, but field exercises, where you go out in your own area and you find things.
You just do field research. You actually go to places and examine things, touch things, look at things, analyze, feel the energy.
Yeah. It's much better when you're in person and you're feeling it and you're absorbing from the locals as well. That's another big thing, which Mark was talking about when he talked to Amos, the homeless Native American. That was a very interesting story. He had quite some quite interesting stories. Sorry, sometimes I get a little ahead of myself. I've been talking for a while now today, doing a bunch of different things, and I get a little tongue twisted at times, so forgive me for my mistakes. Anyway, is there anything else that you wanted to touch on?
No.
Yeah, we're going to keep this one short because I messed it up, and we're not going to do it again because we're tired and I have to wake up very early in the morning, so we'll keep this one nice and short. Make sure you guys go check out Mark's stuff on altmediaunited.com. Also, My Family Thinks I'm Crazy, the podcast. He has a Patreon as well. I will link everything in the description. Make sure you stay tuned at the end of the episode for a preview of the next episode. Go to my website, emmanuelkingman.com. Hit me up for energy work. Hit me up if you need some
Questions,
assistance.
comments.
Yeah,
anything.
you got questions, we got answers. right? Staples.
Yeah, if you want to talk to me, hit up his email.
Yeah. If anyone wants to talk to Mimi, go ahead, send me an email and I'll forward it to her. Mimi is looking to start taking on some
Some more roles.
clientele. Yeah,
I don't know where that's going to lead. We'll see.
we'll find out. But Mimi is very knowledgeable. She is my number one student, and she may not even know it. Well, she just gave me a look,
Student,
everybody who's
teacher,
not
whatever,
watching.
but whatever.
Even if you are watching, you're not watching her because she's not on camera, but she gave me a look.
I did an eye roll because I don't feel 100% student.
Well, you're not, but that's the thing. Mary Magdalene was Jesus's number one student as well. So instead of student, okay, how about this? Instead of disciple and student, we're a staple. You take the two words,
Okay.
a staple, and that's what I just said. So, or before we got onto this, we're staples. We got questions. We do got questions, but I mean, you got questions, we got answers.
You got questions too.
I always got questions. Like, who am I? Where am I? And what is going on?
Those are the questions I want answered right this very moment.
I can't
What
give
is
you anything
going
solid.
on right now?
Can't give you anything solid.
He read my mind. He knows what I said in my head.
Yeah,
Yeah, he does.
maybe.
Oh, you do.
All right.
I could tell by the laugh.
Well, there you have it, folks. Now Mimi is so psychic, she knows when I am psychic. And like I said, she's my number one staple. So everybody go check out Mark. And that's it. Just check it out.
That's it. Good night.
Yeah, so we'll talk to you guys later. We've had better intros, but whatever.
I think we're both just deliriously tired today from yard work, after
know,
work,
real
and,
work.
like cutting. I was cutting wood, and you were doing
Real
fire
yeah.
pit,
and I had
I
to go to work this morning. It was a long ass day.
Work.
Happy Veterans Day, everybody who's a veteran. Thank you for risking your life.
service.
Yeah, and thinking of others before yourselves. So without further ado, here is Mark Steeves. Hello, everybody. On today's show, I have on a guest who has gone from working from delivering Amazon to now delivering podcasts to the people. He books guests on Tinfoil Hat. He has built a podcast cooperative bringing together open-minded people on altmediaunited.com. And he hosts the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. Everybody welcome Mark Steeves to the show. Welcome to the show, Mark. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Todd. This is probably the third or fourth time we've been on a podcast together, so it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and it's all been within a relative recent amount of time, too. And Alt Media United, you invited me out to be a part of that, so I'm very thankful for that. And it's awesome to be in the same league with some really great names in this type of podcast game that we're doing. Yeah, so I want to thank you for that.
Yeah, well, and that's the idea with the cooperative, is to show people that, like, this is an independent thing. You don't have to have 4 or 5 years, 6 years experience, as a comedian or whatever, doing another thing to get into podcasting. Sam, obviously, decades of experience as a comedian that helped him get his show to where it is. But I think, what's so cool about the opportunity he gave me with working for him as a booker, and then that kind of gave way for me to do the podcast I'm doing now, because I initially had a podcast going. It was only on YouTube, and it was with some friends. We only recorded it in person, but I just felt like, what are we going to talk about, and when I started this show, I was able to get in touch with so many different guests. And it was definitely helpful to, have Tripoli in my corner, so to speak, getting in touch with certain people that I've had on the show. I don't know, if they would have been on my show if I didn't also, have them the connection with them through tinfoil hats. So
Right.
totally wouldn't be doing this at the caliber that I'm doing it without Sam's help. And I think, everybody has that same opportunity in life for synchronicity to kind of push them on a path that will lead to amazing things. For me,
Mhm.
that happened to be, listening to Sam Tripoli for like 5 years straight. And then, somewhere along the lines, I get up, the idea like I gotta go see him live, because I saw Joey Diaz and that was funny, but it was in like a weird theater. So then I went to a couple other comedy shows, and then, eventually Sam was coming to New York. So I went and I saw him live. Eddie Bravo was there. The Mormon meth head chick, Jessica Reed, I think was there. So it was kind of, it was a fun, really fun comedy show. And then at the end, Sam was like, hey, anybody who wants to hang out, we're all going to Creek in the Cave, which is a comedy club in New York City that closed. So these guys I had struck up a friendship with while waiting in line, they were like, oh, we're going there, you want to ride? And I was like, perfect. I can't walk there, it's all the way across the other side of New York City. So that gave me a really cool opportunity to talk to Sam and give him this book that I had brought with me, with the intention of having that moment. After a comedy show, you meet with the comic, they take a picture or whatever. And so my intention was to give him the book then, but he was like, oh no, come to the Creek and the Cave and give it to me there. So I said, well, shit, I have to go now, no excuses. And I went. I gave him a copy of the Kybalion, which for people who don't know is the 7 Hermetic laws, and I remember like 8 years prior to that moment, I had bought that book, and I remember seeing the author. It was the 3 Initiates, and I'm like, what the heck is this? Because I was learning about secret societies, and I never had the intention of like joining one or being in one or like participating in that kind of thing, because I've always really despised at least the one that's kind of close to home, which is Skull and Bones. And maybe we can get into that story later on. But, my intention was to like figure out what these people were doing, So when I saw that book, The 3 Initiates, I'm like, well, these guys are initiated into this society. What are they all about? And I found some really powerful stuff in that book. The 7 Hermetic laws have these 7 tenets, that are as followed. I can't rifle them off the top of my head, but I know like the law of correspondence, polarity, gender. There's a bunch of different, 7 different laws that have a plethora of, I'll say, what's the word I'm thinking of? Implications. So like you learn these 7 laws and you'll see how they kind of change your reality. You'll start making those connections. And that happened to me when I was, around 20, 21 years old, way before I ever found podcasts. I was just reading books. I would read, Joseph Farrell's book. I would look for books about immortality, the auras and all of this. Like,
So
really,
you're always just interested in the outer limits?
Yeah. From a really young age. I remember like seeing like Sasquatch and like Loch Ness monster stuff on the television or wherever, UFOs. So it's always drawn my attention. But then really what kind of gave me the idea, and now I'm kind of going back and I'll wrap it towards the Sam Tripoli thing, because cannabis was a big part of that whole journey as well, smoking and having a sort of intimate relationship with cannabis, and that kind of created this intuition that led me to books like the Kybalion, led me to all these different places. And then when I finally found podcasting and really tried to absorb as much information as I could, because I realized like, wow, this is like what I was doing with the books, but like at 10 times the speed. You can listen to like 10 different podcasts in a day on a work shift delivering packages. I was delivering bread. I used to deliver Chinese food. So I've always had different delivery jobs. And I liked the idea of like listening to something while working. So when I found podcasts, I was like, okay, I have to do a job like this. So I got more into delivering, and that's when I started working for Amazon, because they paid the most and gave you the most hours, at least I thought, until COVID came around. But anyways, so I was listening to all these podcasts and really just like feeling this like notion of like, Sam is connected to the same source that we're all connected to, and I really felt like this connection with him. So that motivated me to give him that book, The Kabbalion, that I had for so long. I thought like, well, if he has this book, maybe it'll sort of inspire him to look for guests that will talk about this kind of thing, right? Little did I know, he wanted me to join him on his Patreon show at the time. After I gave him the book, I gave him the book, and he's like, okay, cool, kind of like joked around with me. And this is at like 1 a.m. in New York City by this time. After the comedy show, I was staying at my sister's apartment, which was all the way in Brooklyn. We were in like Long Island City, which is in like Queens or something. So I had to rent one of those little bicycles and bicycle back to her apartment. And, it was kind of a wild night, but it ended up getting me on his Patreon show. And I talked to him a couple times after that. And then one thing led to another, and he has me working for him, finding guests on Zero, which is a spiritual podcast. So I'm like, wow, look at how these things kind of synchronistically formed. I went from giving him sort of like a magical book, so to speak. I mean, the Kabbalion allegedly was written long time ago and just been translated over and over again. And here I am now helping him kind of understand this knowledge by finding guys like yourself who've been on Zero and taught him some things. And that's kind of why, again, back to the initial thing that inspired me to talk about this, is that's why I started Alt Media United and have made the connection I've made, because I found out that like through doing it, most podcasters are on the same team. There's no competition. We're all sort of looking to accomplish the same goal. And I think there's plenty of room for all of us to strive and have like a legitimate career doing something that, A, benefits ourselves in like becoming self-sufficient and not working for the system, but then B, helping other people wake up from the system, so to speak. And that might inspire them to start their own podcast. I mean, the world can't run with only podcasters. We need people to do other jobs. I still have other jobs that I do while I do this job of kind of broadcasting. This isn't like the way I make money technically. But either way, this is the kind of inspiration I had of like, well, it was so easy for me in the sense of like, once I did the work of researching this stuff, learning what people were talking about, learning what information was out there, and having a purpose that aligned with all of that. Because, something that's always been a part of my life, and this is why I mentioned cannabis, is this deep feeling of like the planet needs help, right? We, whatever this is, wherever we are, we as a human species need help, and I found that that's like a more complicated issue than we could just save the world like Superman. I don't know now if I have the same thought of like, oh, it's as easy as we just solve it. I think really it's on an individual basis, and that's why having you on my show and learning about how you've connected with the higher realms was so impactful in this. It's only been a couple of weeks, like you mentioned, since we first talked about it, so it is kind of fresh on my mind. But I remember learning about that kind of stuff again back in one of these books, the Ascension Manual. And what that book kind of showed me was that throughout history, in opposition to what we're taught in school, where they categorize everything, the creator is in all. It really is in all things, and it is in all cultures. It is in all peoples. And yes, there are perversions, and yes, there are inversions, and there are ways that evil manifests itself. But I realized that like all of these different prophets, what we call prophets, were kind of inspired by that same force, that same energy. And for whatever reason, at that point in my life, I felt like, well, maybe plants are like a shortcut to get there, and it was an easy kind of thing to make because a lot of my friends at the time were trying to get me to smoke pot. And I've always really been afraid of that kind of stuff, seeing people have troubles with alcohol that were in my family, and then seeing how that could ruin, relationships and lives. I've always been very scared of anything intoxicating. So it was kind of like a awakening when I smoked weed. But now I'm realizing, well, it's probably good for some time, but it's eventually going to hinder me. I can't make this a dependency. And that's why, again, talking to someone like yourself who is sober and has made these connections without, relying on any sort of intoxicant, plant, medicine, drug, anything like that, I think that's really profound and really adds credibility to that same theory of universality and how we're all connected to source. And these people that are remembered in history as great people are doing something that we all have the same potential to do. And again, that's kind of Alt Media United podcasting. Like, I'm no different than anyone listening. I was one of you listening at one point. So, you can start your own podcast and get your own kind of voice out there and your own truth, because we all sort of see the same truth from a different angle. That's
Right.
what I've been feeling lately. But I just laid a lot out there. What do you got for me, bro?
Well, you definitely, have worked for what you have built. It's that story with Sam. That's something, like you said in the beginning, anyone could do, but you actually just went forth and did it. You found, and it's not that you just went and did it with just anyone. It was the right place at the right time, the right person who was open-minded enough to do the things, and it built. You were sent on this mission essentially that you didn't know you were doing. Sam also on his mission didn't know he was doing it, and the two of you collided, and the collaboration has been incredible. All Media United has so many different podcasts on there. If anyone's looking for a podcast, I used to be part of Facebook groups where people were just waking up and they'd be like, "Oh, where could I go?" And I wish at the time that I had All Media United to send them to, like, listen to all of these podcasts.
Well, the cool thing about it is there is a cool variety. Like, we don't just
Yeah.
have conspiracy or truther or spirituality type
Oh, you
podcasts.
guys got like an Amish conspiracy or something, right?
Well, Phil named his podcast the Amish Inquisition because he thought
Okay.
that would be the only group that wouldn't be offended by a name like that, because of course they're not listening to podcasts, the Amish.
Right.
So that is a conspiracy podcast. So Phil, I should put you in touch with him. He's a cool guy for sure.
Yeah, I got to check out. The name was just hilarious. I'm like, Amish Inquisition. That's it's pretty funny. So, but yeah, like you were saying, there's a vast variety of different people on there who are just really looking for the truth and looking to help others. Is what I really see when I talk to different podcasters. Is nobody ever asks about what can you do for me. It's like, oh, I don't. People don't ask how many views you have, how many listens you have, how much you can push them. To people who just want to do it because, like, oh, I can help. That's like the type of mentality.
Well, and
that is in
also
this community.
And hence the name of my show. This is kind of a community in the sense of, like, you can't really find mutual interests with these subjects in just the average person. A lot of people don't really have the awareness, A, that podcasts exist, and then B, that, like, you can learn stuff like this from podcasts, so
Right.
there definitely is a sort of community in the sense of, like, we found our family, right? Like, and my old family thinks I'm crazy, but this is my new family here on the podcasting realm. Because you're right, there isn't like a, well, what can you do for me to have you on my show? It's more like, well, what can I learn from you and what can you learn from me? Let's teach each other and the audience something. And it's really cool when you can find someone who, like yourself, put together an awesome presentation, or like many of the people on the shelves here, the authors, like Brad Olson is a person who wrote Modern Esoteric, and I had that book again since I was delivering Chinese food way like around the time I dropped out of college and just started like trying to do it on my own and figure out what I was going to do with myself. And I bought his book, and so crazy because I had no idea that I would ever talk to the person who I was like learning
Right.
from. I just thought books were books and these guys existed somewhere in like a library, like writing their books, and you never talk to them. But then I found podcasting and I'm like, oh wow, Brad Olson's actually been on other podcasts. Let me hit him up, and then sure enough, like 8 years after buying his book, I'm talking to the man, and it was a really great conversation. And that's just one. I mean, there's definitely, Chris Bennett is another guy who has a really cool book. You should have him on your show because he goes into how there's like cannabis and how it was used in biblical times and how they reference it.
Oh yeah, I would love that.
Quoted in the Bible. It's pretty interesting. There's a lot of
Yeah,
different.
I've heard about a couple different people talk about that. Yeah, it's really interesting. It's funny what you're just talking about, Brad Olson. There, I had that. The first time I had that was with Justin Deschamps,
Okay.
from Edge of Wonder, and also Into the Storm, or Stillness in the Storm. I'm sorry, Stillness in the Storm. When I connected with him, it was like, reaching through the matrix. Like I had learned so much from this guy. I had watched so many of his videos, and then boom, he was on my screen talking to me, and it was just like, oh shit. And now I've had it, many times since, but he was the first person I had that was like, wow, like you said, they were off in the ether, and they're actually, I can contact this person and have a conversation with them, and it's a great feeling. So, but what you were saying with you were talking about the cannabis not being, maybe it's an addictive type of thing for you. What I went to was CBD. I switched to CBD, and the CBD now, some of the stuff is really really crazy. This Delta 8, they have Delta 8, Delta 9, and Delta 10. They are very potent. I would recommend, if you are going to try to wean yourself off, then maybe try some Delta 8 flower, and it's completely legal. It's really good shit.
I will definitely look into that. I think this like hippie weed that I found a couple weeks ago that this guy grew, a hippie weed isn't the best way to describe it. It's like he's an old hippie, but he had some kind of brown weed that I was smoking, and it did have that effect of like, oh, okay, not smoking as much as I was. But yeah, it's definitely a crutch for research, because something that I did when I was really young and had less, going on really, I would just sit in my room, get high, and read these books, like I didn't have as many as I do now. I've kind of gone a little haywire in the past year getting more, but I've had, a pretty sizable collection since I got out of high school and college as well, because I thought, well, if I'm not going to follow through with college, I better learn some stuff myself. And I couldn't learn stuff that I wasn't interested in, and this is what I've been interested in, and cannabis definitely put me in a sort of focused state. And at that same time, I was actually, learning from this guy, Amos, who, as coincidence and synchronicity had it, it was a homeless dude who happened to be protesting Skull and Bones in a really meta sort of way. Like he wasn't on like Yale campus with like a picket sign or anything. He would walk up to the Skull and Bones tomb every day at noon and scream Geronimo's name like a warrior's prayer, like from the bottom of his gut, and I ran into this dude just smoking weed on the bench. He came up to me, and I happened to have this shirt on with Sitting Bull on it. So he kind of saw me as like an ally, as you would call it now, but back in the day, and still to this day, I've had a really, really strong interest and reverence for Native American cultures. I mean, I live in a state that's named a native Algonquin word. Connecticut means long tidal river, so, and so it's definitely had a influence on my life. So meeting him, I saw the immediate opportunity to like absorb whatever he could teach me, even though, by all appearances, he just seemed like a homeless dude, right? I mean, and he was very honest with me why he was homeless, and later on, a couple years later, he had an apartment and a job, so he wasn't like a long-term bum as some people are. No offense to anybody who has been in that situation, because I mean, dude, I've been in similar situations for sure. I'm not over here with the silver spoon in my mouth by any means, but Amos had a really, really strong impact on me, just kind of teaching me stuff that you can't really learn up here in the Northeast, at least, like the Southwestern kind of cultural stuff, because he wasn't from a tribe around here. He's from Southwest Arizona, one of the descendants of Geronimo's lineage. So it really meant something to him to come here and protest the fact that the Skull and Bones secret society had robbed Geronimo's grave back in the 1800s, and now they use it as a decoration in their little secret tomb, right? Prescott Bush, people might know the story. Prescott Bush grave robbed the tomb and brought it to what they call the tomb in New Haven on High Street. So that's kind of where this stuff took place. And it was also around 2012, this kind of awakening, this shift. And you see people online starting to really feel comfortable talking about this stuff. Whereas I felt like when I was younger, if you talked about religion or spirituality, it was kind of like, what? And like pop culture in the early 2000s to 2010 was like very like secular, and it kind of made me into sort of an atheist until cannabis brought me back to understanding the creator and
It was like no man's land. It wasn't really materialism, and it wasn't really atheism the way it's actually like classically defined as. But yeah, you're right. I mean, many people are our generation, our age, in that early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, it was, and even to the late 2000s, it was really like no man's land. There was really like we were all just hanging out, like basically like having a good time. Really, we weren't really concerned with anything,
Right.
and it feels like everyone was kind of that way. And now, God was like, now we need to shake things up, and people started going left and right and and east and west and green and yellow and whatever. Everything is just crazy right now, divisive. So why, the things that you're doing, especially with the cooperative, but podcasting in general, bringing people together, having conversations that are going to benefit each other as well as an audience. And we do certain things in order to make it more appealing, more entertaining. And when people can stop going to the material stuff that was indoctrinating us, that in that time period that I was just talking about, that you were talking about, that we were kind of like under the spell that there was just like nothing wrong with the world, and actually like there's this whole litany of issues all over the place, and we're just completely blind to it. So now, for whatever reason, everybody has decided, all the financial leaders, all the political leaders, they all decided like, no, we have to radicalize everyone for some reason, right? And now we're here in a place where we're like, okay, stop going to the people, these big megalithic companies that are, that some actor could get paid $21 million for, in order to watch an hour and a half movie, when we're putting out entertaining videos you can watch for free, or for a few bucks a month. Like it's crazy when we think of how we're spending our money and where we're spending it. So I think that we're taking over the entertainment industry because people want truth. The fiction stuff kind of dried up, and it's just been on repeat for like the last 20-30 years.
I'll tell you what, man. I mean, the last time I watched anything on a screen that wasn't, like an internet video about a conspiracy or about like Tartaria has been really interesting lately. It's been only podcasts, like literally podcast. And the only thing besides that is like the occasional Kung Fu DVD that I just figured out that I could watch again because I have an old laptop that takes a DVD player.
Oh, nice.
Or takes a DVD ROM. So I have a whole box over there of kung fu movies that I think I'm gonna work into the Patreon somehow. We'll see. People can like watch them with me because they're all like unlicensed old ones that don't have copyright anymore too. So that's kind of cool. But yeah, I definitely second that. I haven't watched TV in a long time. That's kind of my point. But I think whether it's just me or people are waking up, I definitely think there's a movement towards this stuff. And people hit me up all the time saying they love the show. So that's definitely motivating and keeps me kind of on this path. And that's what's kind of opened my eyes up to understanding what my good friend Mike Wan calls baseline reality, which is like, anything that we know exists outside of human interaction. For example, like stones, trees, not like planted trees in a farm or something like that, but you get what I'm trying to say here. Like the natural world around us, the moon and the sun and how we see them from wherever we are here on this earth. And I feel like that is the kind of like baseline that they build this artificial reality on top of. And within that, there's all these manipulations. And you mentioned, and I totally in concert with what you said about the past 20 years and how culture's kind of been, and how they're kind of manipulating us to be decisive. I think that goes in line with something that well, the prophecy, right? And I think what the powers that be, so to speak, and maybe we can get into that a little bit, and the constellation I learned about that has some connections to the powers that be.
Yeah, go into it, man.
So the powers that be, they use this sort of what Ross Ben, another really awesome researcher adjacent to Michael Wan, they do a show together. He's talking about this as like, they invert prophecy. So they know the prophecy, they're very aware of it. They do their best to conceal it, make everybody ignorant of it for the most part. And then when it, is on like the precipice of happening, they create the prophecy with the energy that's there, and invert it so that they will be on the good side and the rest of us will be on the bad side, right? In this kind of karmic reversal, by manipulating us to be in this lower density vibration, manipulating us to be in the low frequency. We can spend hours and hours talking about all the ills of culture and like the reasons why people's lives are really hard and traumatic, in a lot of different ways. And media manipulation, is one of those. And when you wake up to that, you look for a genuine, authentic type of content, if you want to use that word content. But I think it's just the oral tradition, the way we used to learn, which was passing down stories and learning from our peers and our ancestors, our forefathers or foremothers, right? Passing that story down to us, passing that wisdom down to us. Our brain is geared to learn that way. So I think podcasting, people are going to keep coming to it more and more. But back to the thing about the prophecy, it's like these elite, so to speak, they conceal all that so that they're the only ones who can set the table for when the event happens, right? And I think that's kind of what they've done in Pennsylvania with the Philadelphia. That's why Ross Ben and Michael Wan are so important right now. And I think everybody should get hip to what they're talking about and how they've put all of that sort of history in this shrouded lens so that you see the players and what they did in a certain way that's not accurate.
Mimi, get on camera.
All right.
She's synchronicity. Oh, you can't say it. It says Philly Special. It's the Philly Special, the Super Bowl play that won the Super Bowl for the Eagles. Because
as you were explaining, people being in the places they needed to be to do the things
the
they
players.
needed to do. Yes.
Well,
yeah,
energy there is really strong.
That's where Mimi and I are from.
Yeah, I heard that.
Separately, we moved here.
Yeah, right on. Right on.
20 years apart or
something. So I talked to Michael Wan. He was episode 32, and he told me that he was doing the show with Ross Ben. I didn't get a chance to listen to that show yet, but I definitely should. I love Ross Ben. He was great, and I mean I learned a lot of different things from him, and how he presents what Philadelphia is. So he does a great job. I got to check out their new show. So this prophecy.
No,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, I was going to say, so this prophecy that that they are perversing, what, in your opinion, what is happening right now in the world? Is their prophecy being fulfilled? You know, to what you have come to understand, what's going on?
I definitely, yeah, I think that what, and that's why I kind of mentioned Ross, because, I'm really resting on the shoulders of their research in that sense. And that's kind of inspired me to go and look and see, what Connecticut's all about. Like, I'm from here. It's equally as old as Pennsylvania in the sense of like people colonized here and there around the same time. And, England had a much stronger influence on this part of the world, hence the name New England, right? The whole, 5 states up here, 6 states get, bunched into one group called New England. And
then their football team wins 7 Super Bowls, right?
Well, I will say, there's a lot of like elite schools up here, and that's how those sports teams really work. Honestly, I think that like they recruit from these elite schools, and those families that go to those schools, they're a part of the original families that settled here. So that's kind of where I've been going in and really just starting to look into the history of this place, because I've again found so much interesting stuff in their look into a place where you guys are at. And when I went down to Philadelphia this summer, I actually met with Ross, and he gave us a tour of Wissahickon Creek, right? So I'm not familiar if you guys are ever been to Wissahickon Park.
I used to work right by Wissahickon Valley. Yeah, I used to pass it all the time. That those windy roads, that was my way in and out of the city. It's amazing back there.
So, all right. So there is a lot, and I definitely don't want to like totally go into everything Ross talks about, but I'll try to keep it to what I learned directly from him myself. Right.
You were there with him. That's amazing.
It was, yeah. Well, Mike set it up. So all thanks goes to both of them for making it happen, and Ross for sharing his time with us. But yeah, Tara and I, my girlfriend, my lovely girlfriend, she's back there reading. She and I met Ross, and he kind of gave us a tour, right? So one of the things that's really notable about the whole area, and he mentioned this to us and kind of pointed out some really odd geology in the area, and said like this place is way older than the rest of the area around it. Like whatever happened in the past when the Appalachians were formed, it kind of pushed everything this way, and the glaciers didn't really affect that area as much as you see in other parts of North America. So in a geological sense, that Wissahickon Valley area is like ancient, right? So that kind of adds some energy to this whole thing. And what's interesting is in the woods there was this kind of hermit's cave, and it's like really kind of like a little stone chamber type hut in the earth. And there's a stone edifice that's like, or a stone, I think I don't think it was an obelisk. It was just, it looked like a grave marker stone, like a very tall one. And engraved in it was the Johannes Kelpis, and he was the Kelpius. I think that's who we're talking about here. And he was like the man in the woods. And then we went on a little drive, and we went to this house that says "I am" right above the door, right? And this is the headquarters of the AMORC, right? This is like one of the more notable, the official Rosicrucian orders, right? So we kind of got a little sense of the energy going on in Philadelphia with that tour, in the sense of like, this place has a magnetism to it, and these people who have sort of a role in history, in the real movers and shakers, who makes things happen, whether that's in like industry or government or military, society, cultural influences, right? A lot of them have been associated with this group or other sort of secret societies that are adjacent to it. And it all took place in that area because of the energetic significance. And in that kind of prophetic way, they named the city Philadelphia. And, all of that is definitely stuff that Ross talks about. And Mike talks about it too, in the connection to the Susquehanna River and this river in France, right? I'm sure he might have mentioned that.
No, he didn't. We
No?
didn't get a chance to get into that.
Well, he talks about a lot of stuff, but I think, his original like videos that you can find on his YouTube channel discuss that. And we also have a RSS feed that I created for him called Susquehanna Alchemy. That's where the show that Mike and I do together goes, but it also is a place where I take all the YouTube videos that are kind of like worthwhile to listen to without seeing the visual. So people who have a job like a delivery driver or so, you can't watch YouTube videos while you're driving. So
Right.
I turned them into podcasts so people can get Mike's videos in that form and learn stuff, despite the visual. And then, you can always go back and check it out if you really want to see what's, being depicted in the narration. But yeah, there's a lot of information connecting those two. So when I saw that the Thames River in Connecticut is pretty much like, a mirror in that same way to the Thames River in London, right? Because we have New London, Connecticut. You have obviously Old London, England. So there's that same connection. And a lot of the indigenous history in the colony takes place around, two wars, right? The French and Indian War and King Philip's War. And this war people tend to not know as much about, but it was pretty central to Connecticut. And at this time in Connecticut, you have these.
When was that?
This was way before, the revolution. So this is like the 1600s,
Okay.
late 1500s. People started coming towards this area, and in the early 1600s they began to colonize Massachusetts and Connecticut, right? And they kind of came down from the north, the Massachusetts people. So like places in the northern part of Connecticut like Hartford and Windsor got settled first, whereas the coastline kind of happened afterwards. And there was a lot of indigenous people here that the that the English really had a pretty good relationship with as far as trading and all that goes. But when I'm looking at all this stuff, I'm like, okay, what stands out? What's interesting? And most importantly, what can I find today that still exists that might teach me something about this time period, like for instance, a stone structure or some other sort of artifact that could be in the landscape or in a museum possibly, or just like out in the open. Like a lot of people talk about Tartarian, theories, the Tartarian theories. They're like, oh, this building and this building, like,
Right.
so I'm really like diving into all that. And I find out that there was this Dutch fort that was described as a bastion fort, right? The Tartarian type theory always talks about star forts. Well, the other name for star fort is a bastion fort. And the Dutch had this bastion fort in what is now Hartford, which is the capital of Connecticut. So I found that very interesting. And we're planning on going there and doing a survey. But that was a big part of this period in time. And, what I'm getting to here is we learned a lot about indigenous cultures as much as we can through this kind of early time in the colonial era before the United States became the United States, because there was more of an emphasis on trade and less of an emphasis on land. It was a big, part of the history. Like colonists came, they bought land from people who didn't really, were told, have a concept of what was going on. They sort of understood it more to be like, well, you're paying us this and we're going to let you be here too. Whereas the colonists were like, okay, we're paying you this and now we're going to live here and you're not, right? And the indigenous people, for the most part, were able to live kind of side by side for a few decades, but eventually, we're told disease and all that had a part. I don't know how much I believe that part of it, because I think there was, with the Tartarian theory, a big cataclysm that we're not told about. And this contributed to the massive decline of this culture that was here before Europeans colonized it, right? So we see in, these conflicts with the English that the indigenous peoples had a very advanced culture, not like the one we're described, especially as it goes westward. We're told, that they're savages and stuff. And obviously now we have a much, much more, lucid view of what their culture is and was than we did then. But it's interesting to see like these kind of like symbiotic relationships in the early colonial days where certain tribes basically took the side of the English and turned on the rest of the indigenous people in the state. And now those people have a casino, go figure. But, this is like kind of where I'm researching, because, that's kind of like shortening the whole story down to one little like punchline. But it is true that like this tribe definitely benefited from taking the side of the English, and the rest of the people kind of went elsewhere. And now most of the people that used to live in New England are kind of settled up in Canada in the Iroquois nation. But it's really fascinating to find out that the people who lived here had stone alignments. Okay. And these stone alignments were able to help them understand where the sun and the moon were, which was essential for agriculture. So we're told these people were like hunters and gatherers, but that's not really true, in the sense that like we have a lot of evidence to show that they were farming, and they,
they were migrating.
Right. So
Funny
this
you
is
say
like,
that.
what's that?
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's all
I'll
right.
finish what you're saying, and I want to talk to you about the flag of Connecticut when you're done.
Ooh, I'd love to hear what you have to say. So yeah. So basically my point that I'm getting at is it's a very murky time in history, and we're told a lot of things about the indigenous people, and then there's a lot of things that are left out. So that's kind of where I'm looking into, and I found that there's a lot of interesting stone structures, and I don't know how much that fits into the Tartarian narrative, but what I do think is, if these stone rows that are everywhere in New England, and I'm sure there's plenty in Pennsylvania as well, if you go out into the more like suburban and rural areas, but there's these stone rows everywhere, and we're told, colonists built them, slaves built them. But like I said, when I looked into the historical records, you find out that actually no, there are stories of colonists who asked the Native American people, like, who built the stone rows? Did you guys build them? Why'd you build them? And it was sort of like a custom, but it was like a secret custom, and it was definitely not, elaborated on too deeply. So I don't think we're told the whole truth about why there are just like lines and lines and lines of stones. And if you really examine some of these stone rows that you can find in your own front and backyard, at least here in New England, some of them have huge stones in them. And obviously some of that could be from development, and in the modern era they had bulldozers. They could push these big boulders into place. That's definitely a theory. But some of these stone rows go through national parks where there's never been a bulldozer. Some of them go through just regular old forests that, again, never had a bulldozer driving through them. You would
How big are these boulders?
Tons.
Yeah, okay.
You would need either sort of you would need like what we would, the same sort of arguments people make about the megalithic structures. You imagine like people have like logs that they roll the stones on or something or other. But some of these stone rows go up hills on mountains and stuff. And like I said, there are big boulders in these rows. And you can say, okay, well, maybe the big ones were already there and then they just kind of piled the rest of them in between. That's fair to say. But either way, there's a record, in stone of all of this architecture. For what purpose? It's really not elaborated on more than kind of how I just described it. There's that colonists built them to devise property, right? You make a bunch of stone lines and you say, okay, this plot, this plot, this plot. But again, you have a bunch of basically, calling them stories isn't as true they're really, it's historical record. It's how we kept record of things back then. It's hearsay, you know. Now that sounds like, oh well, we can't trust hearsay, but back then, I mean, people weren't writing that much. So if there was a historian in the town, you know, what he wrote down was kind of important. And what you find is stories of like people going on expeditions and finding these stone rows going up mountains and being like, who built this? And the natives are like, oh yeah, well, we just, every time we walk by, we throw a stone on this pile, you know, and that's to honor the spirit of the Manatha or Hobomoko, you know, like, so there was definitely like, again, a very advanced sort of spiritual ideology or culture within these groups that, you know, aren't here really for the most part, other than the Mohegans in this state. So yeah, you know, for someone who's like totally just like inspired by what Ross and Mike are doing, I've found a lot in a short amount of months. And I kind of, you know, I don't expect people to be like, whoa, mind blowing, but I think people should go out and look up stuff that's relevant to their surroundings, you know, because that's
explore your own backyard.
Yeah, it becomes such a fun journey to go out. Like Tara and I, we just go out on drives and kind of keep our eyes open, and when we find something that looks strange, we pull over and get out and look at it, you know, and we really just try to like put our mind into the place of like, who built this and why, or what is this here, you know. And like we stopped at a really huge boulder today that was it just seemed out of place, you know, and there was other boulders kind of stacked around it, and then we saw one that was kind of like leaned on each other, and I see this hole drilled through it. I'm like, okay, so we know that that is not, you know, ancient, because that indicates that a machine kind of drilled steel through that stone and picked it up and put it there, right? So we have to definitely not like go, I have to have discernment for sure. And that's why I bought some books that, you know, teach you how to work with stone and how they work with stone. And I think, you know, what I'm going to find as I go into this more is like the Freemasons, you know, and their whole like secret
stone builders
wrapped around stonemason. I think there's something to that, man. And the fact that there's all this stone here and the indigenous people have something to do with it, I think it's just fascinating, and it's bound to go somewhere.
Right. Well, we're both now down in Georgia. So she moved down here 20 some years before I did. And we're down here. So we've gone to the Georgia Guidestones in the summer, and we went to St. Augustine, Florida to go Tartaria searching. And what you're saying right there at the end was very true, and that you have to use discernment, and you can look at the structure and tell this is from one time period, this is from another time period. It becomes very clear to you, but how far back some of the things go, because we can look at something that says it was built in 1886, and we're like, well, there's just no way, because, you know, in 2 years, this building couldn't have been completely built. So it was probably already done, and then it was just like remodeling, you know, maybe it was knocked down and it had to be refixed up. So you can see that there's also different time periods. But Mimi, you had something?
The ability to go do the field work and actually go to these buildings and touch these buildings and look at things close up instead of in a book or on a video makes and being able to feel the energy while you're there. That's even.
I have a question about where stone even comes from. Like stone itself isn't something that just naturally occurs. It's it's fossils basically of something that.
I remember the rocks we seen at that one park, this big, the one that looked like a big old turtle.
It looks like a turtle and a frog, and I have all the photos. I mean, they look like they could have been flash frozen in place. It could have been something.
Petrified.
Yeah, I don't, you know, I have many ideas, but you said a lot of things in there that I wanted to touch on. But Mimi, you said you had something about the flag.
Oh, I just wanted to ask if you knew much about your state flag.
What popped out? Did you look at it?
Well, yeah, I did. And the first thing, when you started talking about Connecticut, I was like, let me just look. I just wanted to see the flag for some reason.
Yeah, I gotta look.
You've got 3 sets of grapes, which are supposed to represent, I guess, the 3 original colonies that came together there to form Connecticut. And you have some Latin on your flag, and maybe Todd can read that Latin.
Here, let me share my screen real quick
Yeah.
so I can
So
pull this
that
up.
means he who transplanted still sustains.
Right.
So
He who transplanted continues to sustain. And and they say that it may derive from Psalm 80. So then, I went down to find Psalm 80. And Psalm 80, it talks about thou hast brought a vine out of Egypt. Thou hast cast out the heathen and planted it. And their motto expresses our belief that he who brought over the vine continues to take care of it. So whoever brought those people here to colonize, those groups here to colonize, are the people that have to try to sustain that place.
Wow, that's some big time stuff right there, and that touches into what I'm about to get
And
into.
that flag was that motto was adopted somewhere around 1639. So I know you were talking about 1500s, 1600s.
Okay.
Yeah.
yeah,
So
my town, my hometown was like founded around that time. So yeah, that is like the crucial period. And Connecticut was a colony of the English, for before the United States, fought that war. And the first governor of the Connecticut colony was an alchemist by the name of John Winthrop Jr., and he was one of the first founding members of the Royal Society. So, I definitely think that he probably had a hand at that, symbol, if anything, or maybe even like the connection to the Bible, because they did like to encode that symbolism, a la Ross Ben and Michael Wan's work. They're always making those connections. But Todd, you said you had something cooking?
yeah, so you brought the Philadelphia connection into it, and it was funny when we first connected on here. The first thing I noticed was your sign that says the French connection, and then you asked me about the French connection to Philadelphia, and so right there is synchronicity. We have many synchronicities. I have been a truck driver for many years. Before that, I delivered food, listened to all the same types of conspiracy theory podcasts, I'm sure, into the same types of things. We have lived similar lives, so there's a lot of synchronicity. So today, I think maybe a little bit yesterday too, but today I kept thinking for some reason about the Philadelphia experiment, the Philadelphia Liberty Bell, and you've been researching Tartaria,
and I must have felt that and put on my Philadelphia shirt.
Yeah, you put on your Philly special.
Yeah.
So in the Tartaria research, have you discovered the odd amount of bell-shaped things that are occurring all throughout the structures?
Yeah, and I definitely see like the logic to people saying like, oh, okay, you can conduct electricity, or you can make sound harmonize with those things, and it can have a sacred geometrical effect somehow on the building, and then thus the people who are inside the building. Churches definitely. And there's a lot of talk about like artists and architects in that time as being connected to mystical things. So I definitely think that it's part intuition and part ignorance. And I don't mean to like rain on anyone's parade, because there's definitely a lot to do and a lot to learn from the Tartaria stuff. But yeah, like look at that. So I mean, I honestly, I'm not gonna say I know either way, but what I've learned as I keep diving further into this whole thing called architecture and the architect, it's very much connected to the Freemasons and the first, Temple of Solomon. It all goes back to that, but there's no reason why, as you're showing,
original stonemasons.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason why they couldn't have learned this stuff in the Indus Valley in Asia somewhere. I mean, like you're showing me here in these pictures, like the Buddha Bell, and then you see that in the what's kind of called Moorish classical architecture,
Right.
neoclassical architecture, and even that word Moorish architecture, it's like okay, because when you really kind of dive into Tartaria, you learn about the Moors and how they were possibly travelers who settled the Americas by sailing across the Atlantic. There's many different groups, the Phoenicians, which some people say, and I've learned recently that the Phoenicians and the Irish might have been the same, and then the Moors have a similar connection to
Oh,
Ireland.
really?
Yeah, so we have there's a lot of different authors who've talked about this and how the connections between Irish architecture and Egyptian architecture. I think what you'll find is that Egypt plays the primary role in a lot of the symbolism, and it's been encoded in the Bible. And
The Grand Canyon?
well, yeah, it's a hit the
That
fast
is
forward
Egypt
button.
over there, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, and I just shared like kind of a goofy image on my Patreon, but it is like a real good depiction of what we might mythologically see the ancient world as. And it puts kind of like this land bridge in between what we would call like Thebes or Africa, the northern part of Africa, between that and where the Mayan civilization was, and that would have been Atlantis. And it couldn't make sense that when the ocean level was much lower before the flood, the Great Flood, that there was more land mass and more ways for people to go back and forth. And then, in this, deluge of water, all of that, went underwater, and that's why we find structures in the Bermuda Triangle. That's why we find structures off
Bimini
the coast of
Road.
Japan and China. Yep. And then all over the place where there's a lot of island chains, you'll find that sort of thing, because it's very obvious with the work of like Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock that definitely was a major
Oh,
period in
shit.
human history.
Oh, man, I just banged my knee on the desk. Damn,
Oh,
that hurt.
geez. You even like sent a shiver up my spine when that.
Sorry, that shit hurt. But what you were just saying right there, the deluge, is a perfect segue back to what I was saying. So the bell-shaped, if you can see this one, anyone looking at the screen, it reminds me of helmets from different world wars back in the day, that they look like maybe German helmets. And then, so
Goodness.
what, did that do that for you as well?
Well, I'm going to use a different reminder. It reminds me of, you ever watch SpongeBob and you see plankton? They put the buckets on the heads to control the other fish. Do you remember that?
Yeah,
Well,
the mind control.
This goes into the Templars, and really, I think like
Right.
so one of the major theories into Tartaria is like the time period between the 500s and the 1500s didn't exist, or was kind of written into history in this kind of like superimposed way to artificially put a bunch of time in between our time period and the period of Christ, right? Because they wanted to separate us as much as they could from Christ, and basically, I think, end the idea of prophecy, right? Because they felt like, okay, God doesn't need to send us any more prophets. We have our prophet. It's Jesus. We figured out a way to be the middleman between Jesus and the people and use Jesus's message, inverted, corrupted, that pure message that it was, invert it and corrupt it. And that's good enough, right? So any prophet that came after was burned at the stake. It was heresy, So I think part of that was imposing this huge time period between them. So that's one of the reasons why I think that theory might be valid. But the other reason why it could be a little bit valid, or somewhat kind of not true, but like in the sense of they're mistaking that for something else, right? Because the Templars were formed at that time. And the reason why I take this point and bring it up is because what you're showing me, and what Missy, right? I'm sorry. Mimi. I should remember that, because that's the name. That's what I call my grandma, Mimi. So, all right, Mimi. What Mimi brought up with the kind of plankton helmet that would control your mind. Think about the word Templar, temporal, temporary, right? And this kind of like temporal control over the world.
A transmitter.
Yeah, or temple, and what do we call the sides of our skull? Right. So I think that there's definitely a connection between architecture, ley lines, geomagnetic energy of the planet, and how we think and behave. And the people who are trying to manipulate the timeline or create prophecy, like we were saying earlier, or even just trying to control all the wealth for themselves, I think they're using architecture in this way. And why I brought up the whole time gap thing is because the Templars have their origin in that supposed made up time period. So it's like, okay, well, maybe that's why they're there, because this whole thing was made up. And like they kind of, who knows, I could be adding more speculation onto other people's speculation, but I think it was very curious to see that. At first I was like, oh well, if the Templars existed, then this theory is definitely wrong, because this is a time period, there's a history of these guys starting in the 1100s going to the 1300s, and the Tartarian theory is telling me 500 to 1500 didn't happen. So I'm like, why? Right. So that's where that came into my mind in this moment. But I definitely think that architecture is totally a part of the whole spell. And that's why it goes back to the Temple of Solomon, because they had that building that was built to the proportions of a man in the microcosm macrocosm way, in that sacred architecture type way, which was a sort of remnant of the pre-Diluvian times when the civilizations were advanced. They were connected to the creator. They were using free will, but also guidance from the creator. And then we kind of went into this post-flood, post-Tower of Babel time, when people kind of are like, okay, school's over, go figure it out yourself, and like now we're out of our infancy as a humanity, and we're into our like teenage pre-adult years of like figuring it out. And I think that comes with a lot of like inner turmoil and bullying each other. And that's like the age of Pisces, with like the duality and the decisiveness. And like I think Aquarius, the reason why things are getting so decisive now as we move into the age of Aquarius is because that Piscean energy is trying to like finalize itself almost. So in a way, so that we can move past it. It's like kind of like you have to hit rock bottom before you can like come back again and change your life for the better. And I've definitely had those moments, and that's definitely like back to the whole network of control thing. That's why they do this, the grid. That's why they try to arrange our lives the way they do. And architecture is a huge part of that.
Right. So what I was getting at with the bells was that this to me looks like some kind of landing, a mass UFO landing, possibly. Something to this effect.
The Vamanas were flying ships that
the
they
Diglocka.
Well, but think about the Vimana, like there are Vimana towers, right? But to your point, like the Vimana is remembered as a flying object. So, and they built a structure based off of it. So I think that's a great theory there. Like that could have definitely been UFO, like a trying to mimic a situation where UFOs landed. And that's why they put all those bells like they did there.
The Diglocka, the Nazi bell, it's that shape, and these quote unquote bell towers from these churches that may have not have been churches, and that these bell towers may have been launching pads, landing pads, or something to this effect, like a Jetsons type of vehicle for these Diglocka, for these Nazi bells. So how that came into play with the word Philadelphia was the Liberty Bell, and the crack in the Liberty Bell with the Philadelphia experiment was that there a crack in the firmament due to the Philadelphia experiment. And then we get the they went back past when the Liberty Bell was cracked. Why is that a thing? And what is Liberty? But that is ISIS, as ISIS's bell.
People who haven't already, I mean, we were going to mention it an eighth time here, but the 40th parallel with Michael Wan and Ross Ben, because what you just brought up, the Philadelphia experiment, listen to this. I just learned this while listening to their show, is that the 40 by 40 by 40, right? So they built the first colony in Philadelphia on the 40th parallel with 40 men in a 40 by 40 structure, right? And Philadelphia experiment happened in 1943. The Montauk experiment happened in 1983, 40 years later, and we are on the precipice of 40 years later from that here now in 2021. 2023 will be 40 years and 80 years from the Philadelphia experiment, 40 years from the Montauk experiment. So you see this kind of, and what's interesting is the Native Americans, to bring them back in the picture, what was their sacred number? 4. So
Wow.
4 directions and
there's
4 to, you know, balance it
Have
out.
you talked to Michelle Gibson?
I have, yeah.
Yes.
I love her.
Yeah, she's big on the Philadelphia experiment. When we talked on here, she was talking, she had this whole thing worked out where it was 17 or from 1492 to 1942, there was some kind of switcheroo, some kind of time loop that we may have been stuck in, or something
like
to
a
the
Groundhog's Day type of thing.
yeah, that there was exactly 225 years in the middle was the year 1717, and right around the 1740s, all these different people, Adam Weishaupt being one of them, were being born. And then in the late 1700s is when all these different wars start happening with the Moor people. And then there are the constitutions, the Illuminati started, the United States has started, you know, several places around the world had gained constitutions in the late 1700s, which is weird. And then, you know, everything that happened in the
Rothschilds,
1800s.
Illuminati, all that stuff happened 17.
Yeah, so there's something to this time, and I think the Liberty Bell being cracked may be a reminder to those with eyes to see and ears to hear. You know, those who know, the Liberty Bell is like, oh yeah, we went back in time, we cracked liberty, we cracked freedom, and we broke free will by going back in time, or something
Right.
to that effect.
Well, let's think about this like from the word perspective. And I just looked up the prefix Khan because I had a sort of instinct, and I want to follow it because this kind of connects to the Tartaria stuff in the sense of like Genghis Khan, right? Is remembered as like this great guy, and not great guy, but really great conqueror. Yeah, he conquered a bunch of different peoples and organized this whole huge nation in Eurasia and Asia. And so interesting enough, like I thought about this a few days ago. I'm like, Khan, I wonder what that means. I never looked it up, but then when you said constitution, I'm like, okay, I got to look it up because this is a synchronicity. So at least just the inspiration. So I look it up, and Khan means to come together or together with, right? And we're talking about alchemy here, the bringing together of two things. The Constitution was like essentially, you know, like the Connecticut state flag kind of said, like blending the foreigners with the natives and switching them so that the natives, you know, pushed out into reservations, and the colonists, you know, spread their, you know, sowed their oats, so to speak, and just spread like wildfire. So I think there's definitely a connection with that word con. And then you have the concept of like a con man, who is somebody who takes their will and imposes it on you, kind of blending, you know, what you have, and then taking, like, leaving you with nothing and taking everything, you know, with them, right? So I think that kind of maybe comes from also this idea of like when we look at the word Tartaria, we look at the word Mongol, right? You have these words were created as a sort of derogatory term against an opposition, right? So the, you know, Western world in the Greek world were in opposition with the threat of, you know, all of these other people, and Alexander the Great went out and he conquered them. And they had this idea of the Mongols as like the worst people because they were the only people who I think weren't defeated by Alexander the Great. He had like some conflicts with them, but he never quite conquered past like Afghanistan or anywhere up north of there. So there was always this kind of like idea, maybe even of the Tartars from that time too, because we have the word tar, you know, like I remember Andreas was on my podcast and he kind of broke this down. Andreas Exertus.
I had him on.
Right. Yeah. So talking about how tar, you know, tar and feather somebody, or like tarnish, or like, you know,
barbarian.
Yeah, and that was the other one that was escaping my mind, was the idea of a barbarian. And you see this in colonial times. You see
Right.
like this idea that everyone else was a heathen, everyone else didn't believe in God, so they were barbarians, Tartarians, mongrels,
Right.
all these derogatory terms that most people would consider just racist right at this point in history, and be like, oh, that was just racism, right? But I think that's part of the psyop, is like if you get people to just think like it was just hatred, right, then they won't look into it any further, because they're like, oh well, it's just because they're hatred, they have hatred for other people, and that's not right. Which is true, I mean, to some degree, that the evil people seem like they hate others, and they may very well hate others, and that's not
Mm-hmm.
something that we should encourage or even like maybe examine too far. But I think that, you know, it as a whole turns people off from looking into these subjects and understanding the actual history of human beings, and the relationship between the races is a very, very controversial topic. But I think when you look into it, you find that like there's a lot of esoteric stuff in there, and it goes back, you know, to the Bible with the 12 tribes. It also goes back to like, you know, what they said the original races of man were, and like even like some newer stuff with like Zachariah Sitchin translating some really, really old stuff, talking about how they created, you know, this type of man first and then this type of man
Are you
second.
familiar with the Bach saga?
Of course, yeah. And then there's like
Yeah.
all these different oral traditions from different parts of the world, you know, and that kind of connects to shamanism too, because you have shamans in Finland, you have them all the way across Russia in the north there, and then you have shamans all here in North America. And we're told that, you know, people move from Asia across the Bering Strait into North America. So there's, you know, cultural pollination there. But I think, you know, what's really going on is there was an ancient culture, like I said, that was connected much further than we're told. And then
Right.
somewhere along the line, they were like, no, we got to take the reins in on this and start to rewrite history and keep people in this mental cave like Plato talked about.
Right. Well, it's you talked about Khan, Genghis Khan in the beginning there, and his name. So there's two ways of spelling it: Kahn and Khan. That type of Khan. One
Right.
means king, and the other one means king of kings. I had Ryan Zem on, and he broke this down for us. And Genghis Khan fills a lot of role in the book of Revelations. There are different seals that he appears or appear to be breaking with him. The first four, Ryan Zem came up with it, and it was incredible. And he was actually a white guy with red hair, and he wasn't Asian. He wasn't depicted the way that we know him today to be in Mongolia. I talked to Ryan Alexander yesterday, who was telling me that these people were chased into Mongolia because the rest of the world didn't like them, and they decided to stand up against these people who were giants, that were doing things all in the Americas as well as all over the world. There were different factions of them, and for whatever reason, the humans felt strong enough to go take them out.
Yeah.
So that's what was happening. I think that's what the French and Indian War was like, the final remnants of that. Or not the French, but the French and Indian and the French in Russia when they went to Moscow to fight the Muscovites, the giant Muscovites, because we know St. Petersburg was actually the capital of Russia at that time. So why would the French just stop in Moscow? And maybe they had flying machines, the Nazi Bell type of the Die Glocke. Maybe that's what they used to get over the Alps. And you know, it's a crazy idea, but 400,000 French got wiped out after they went all this way, and you know, they shouldn't have been able to be wiped out the way they were. Maybe it was giants with different types of rail guns or ray guns, so to speak.
Well, that's like particularly super fascinating for me because I don't know if you guys saw me stand up and get that book, but I'm 6'8". So by all standards of averages, I'm probably a giant amongst human beings. And I also have like I have a red light bulb, but this is like an actually like a red tinged beard. And like I'm a French person. My grandfather and grandmother moved to Connecticut from New Brunswick, Canada, which, my grandfather's father was an Acadian, which is a part of that whole
Are you
sort of
Scottish?
Arcadian. And then that's the other side of my dad's side. We have some French Canadian, but also Scottish and
I
a little
get
bit
a
of
big
Italian.
Scottish vibe off of you.
Yeah, okay. So that's
Yeah.
kind of like where that all like becomes super fascinating for me, because I'm like, oh, well, what if there's like an ancestral reason why I'm super interested in this stuff. But I also think like being born in a place, makes you connected to the land, and your ancestors are kind of like whoever also lived there at any point in time. So
That's a good point.
quite literally, like if there were giants here, which I know plenty of stories of different giants in the United States, and even when they're discovering, quote unquote, discovering the new land, they talked about all different like groups of people, and some of them were giants for sure. But I hadn't heard that before about the Muscovites, but it makes sense considering the capital or a big city in Russia is Moscow, So I definitely want to look into that further, man. That's super cool.
Yeah, St. Petersburg's like one of the most beautiful cities ever. So if
They have
you
those,
see all that architecture,
yeah, they have those same things you were just pointing out too, or at least a variation of them, right?
yeah, it's crazy. Mimi, you had something? I thought,
I'm gonna save it for the intro.
okay. Mimi likes doing a lot of talking in the intro.
Yeah, sometimes if I don't find the appropriate moment to squeeze in, it's just better to
The
save it
moment's
for
gone.
the moment's gone, and I don't want to be the circle
Oh.
back girl.
No worries. Well, I
Thanks, Jen.
did want to back up that thing I said about architecture. So I like went back to this book I just recently bought, the Dictionary of Freemasonry. I don't know how trustworthy it is, because it might have been written by a Freemason, but it's interesting. I go to the word architecture and I'm immediately drawn to the left side of the page where it says Ark of Enoch, and it talks about
Wow.
Knights of the Ninth Ark, the ritual of which says Enoch was the seventh in descent from Adam and lived in the fear and love of his maker. Being inspired by the Most High and in commemoration of a wonderful vision, this holy man built a ninefold temple underground and dedicated the same to God. He was assisted in the construction of this subterranean temple by Jared, his father, and Methuselah, his son. Without being acquainted with his motives, this happened in that part of the country which was afterwards called Canaan, or the Holy Land. The engraving here used is copied from an old Masonic publication and appears to allude to this event. Now, why this is even more particular to what we were talking about before is because in Connecticut, there's two towns, one called Canaan and one called New Canaan. New Canaan happens to be where the richest people in the whole state live. A lot of people think it's Greenwich, but because it's a city, it kind of averages out. But New Canaan is like the richest area in Connecticut. And then Canaan, which is like all the way up north, is a sacred space to the indigenous people who used to live in this state many years ago. But then, I'm drawn over to the architecture definition that initially brought me here. And they go into, like I said, the Temple of Solomon, from which the true knowledge of architecture became diffused throughout the world. Thus, through the ages has the institution been transmitted, and though deprived of its operative character, it is nonetheless efficient in its symbolism and importance. So I don't think that when they use the word symbolism, they mean what most people would define symbolism as. I think they mean like sigils, like taking a sigil, a magic sigil, and putting it somewhere so it has an effect on people, in the now.
Wow, that's interesting. And I've been thinking about that as I've been learning about the Bach saga. For example, is really big into the word magic, and I've been looking into the word magic and how words, if you take out the vowels, you can put together the consonants and see how, this word is this word. It's just been repurposed or whatever. And before we had written language, there were symbols and there are things that were just seen by people. So obviously it was the symbols first, then we started making noises with our mouths, and then we started making symbols for those specific noises, and now we call them letters. And we have a whole laundry list of things in order to explain the most minute thing. But back in the beginning, the symbols were much more powerful because you saw something and right away it puts you into a different state of thinking than one little letter. Like if you see the letter I, for example, it doesn't mean much to you because it's so minute in its definition to what the rest of the word might be or the rest of the sentence might be, that the letter I has completely no meaning, whereas a circle next to a triangle or something to this effect, it may mean something so much more than you could comprehend, and maybe it would take multiple sentences. So, a little circle versus the letter I is going to be the way we perceive things today. It's much more magical. So when we talk about how these satanic cults are running the world, these occult type of things are going on, and we're like, it's the symbolism, and we're called crazy conspiracy theorists. It's because it's so simple to use symbols that people can't comprehend, like, oh no, they wouldn't do it that way. But when you take humanity back to its basics, it had to be symbols because that's all that they had. So symbols encapsulate so much more than what today's language could.
I am in concert with that, man. I definitely think that that's a big part of what's going on in the world today. I mean, and that's why the Tartaria research is kind of important, but it's also, important to exercise discernment so that you don't see, like for me, seeing a big huge stone leaning on another one today. I was like, bingo, that's a pedestal boulder. Boom, let's go check it out. I pulled over and then I saw that drill hole and I was like, no, that was probably a road crew that picked that up and placed it there for whatever reason. So, no big deal, but that's the kind of thing that we need to do. Like, go out, look for it, but then also, don't be afraid to get disappointed and be critical of the evidence, because it's more valuable when you have that discernment. But yeah,
man. Is there anything that you wanted, anything else that you wanted to get into before we wrap it up here?
Well, there was that thing that I mentioned at the beginning, but I think we should save it for next time, because this was a fun conversation. I definitely want to have more with you and Mimi. And to be fair, it's from a book written by an author who I'm gonna have on the show in a couple days. So I'll probably have more to say about it then than I do now, anyways.
Yeah, it's always good to talk to the people who we learn from. We learn their material and then we go talk to them. It makes for a much better, more complete knowledge base.
Mark has mentioned many books today, so I have ordered one. You'll see what it is when it gets here. One of the ones that you have put up. Yeah, I like to read a book.
No, I've been ordering them too.
This is the one that he, the author who I'm about to interview, Peter Champois, is the author, but Gaia Matrix is the book, and it's
Earth's Mother.
Fascinating. Yeah, it's really interesting stuff. So I'm excited to talk to him, but yeah, we'll see how it goes.
I trust your book reads. I can feel that I can trust your book reads. So I figured pick one and go with it, and we'll talk about it.
Is there a city in Georgia called Alexandria, or am I just? So you guys start the Library of Alexandria down there. Come on now, get more books.
Oh man. Oh, I'll tell you,
I have books in every room and I love it.
You talked about Freemasons a little bit. A few different times. Georgia is like the land of Freemasons. It is. I mean, Georgia and South Carolina, you go down highways, not even highways, like little 2-lane highways, one road each way. And there's like 55 miles per hour. Every time you come into a different town, every 5-10 miles, they have different like big old billboards basically of wood. And on them, they show what secret societies are in this town. And it's so many of them all the time. South Carolina is big into it. Georgia, they're master builders down here. I mean, the Georgia Guidestones are in the city of Granite, right? What's it called? The
They're
capital.
the granite capital, yeah.
Yeah, the granite
Mhm.
capital of the world. And again, where does stone come from? Is that some kind of petrified living material that just died all in that area? Was it a pit of some sort?
Is it remnants from the Saturn event, that whatever that was, when Saturn,
Exploded.
Yeah, that. I mean,
And burned up and flash froze Antarctica from Tierra del Fuego to frozen.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure I heard that part.
Oh, it's called the Land of Fire.
Yeah.
Antarctica used to, in the 1500s, was called the Land of Fire, and there's this map in 1587 where this guy, The Destruction of Atlantis, Ragnarok, or the Age of Fire and Gravel by Ignatius Donnelly. So
this is an Irish guy too, to bring that whole thing back.
okay, and this also goes with the mud floods, because if there was landmass and Australia was possibly connected to this. So this map I was saying 1587, it has dinosaurs on it. Dinosaurs weren't discovered, their bones weren't discovered till the 1800s, and there's no way that this guy could have known dinosaurs from 65 million years ago in 1587. So obviously there was something there. And now there's a landmass in South America that's called Tierra del Fuego, but all the old maps depict it as South America went right into Antarctica, and it was the going into part that was called Tierra del Fuego.
Okay.
And there was a woman, or no, it was a panther depicted with a woman's face and a woman's breast, and there was like a merman in this photo, on this map. And this, I mean, it was an accurately drawn map as well, with Antarctica's,
I think it's on our globe too.
line.
I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
It is on the globe. That we
Well,
have.
not, yeah, but it's in South America. It's not, yeah. So we have all these globes now that we've been collecting, looking at maps everywhere we go.
I got a globe too. That's awesome. Yeah, I found a globe somewhere in my travels, and that's really neat. Yeah, definitely a lot of neat things you can find looking at old maps and old history books and whatnot.
Yeah, the globe we have has Tartaria on it too, so
Yeah.
that's why we got it.
Yeah, it's a huge one. Yeah, it's crazy. It's in line. Oh, and there was one more thing I wanted to talk to you about was, so Michael Wan, right when you started seeing your, which is on Patreon, right? It was a SEEEN.
Yeah.
Yeah. So right when you started that, I had him on maybe like right before you started, to talk about, I was going back up to Pennsylvania to, I don't know if I think I was picking up my daughter, or I was taking her. Do you remember what? I forget.
don't know. Picking
But
her up, I think. Picking her up.
yeah, I think I was picking up my daughter from Pennsylvania. She stayed there for the summer. And I asked Michael about, where I should stop to put some orgonite, or orgone. If I was going to gift some, where should I go on the Susquehanna River? So we talked, and I ended up, I'm not going to say exactly where, but I looked at the map and I found this crazy, just the names of this area in Virginia, very crazy. There's a Route 666 that is in between a Route 10 business and Route 10 district, and it's only like 3/4 of a mile long, and there's only two businesses or two places on this roadway. It's this Route 666, and it is a cemetery directly next to a Smithfield meatpacking plant. And
I just talked to Aunt Claire about this today. Did you hear me talk to her about it?
No.
What the heck?
And
okay.
So, and the weirdest part to me that people may not pick up on is the number 10, the two splitting of 10s, that is the DNA strand being split, and the 666 going across, and it's dead people and pigs. And I haven't been able to eat pork ever since then.
Oh my God.
Yeah, but they got this place called like Battery Park, like it's some kind of energy center. Like everything around in this area is all just
weird.
Yeah, man, the way it's all worded.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. Yeah, I had a very similar experience where, like, not this summer, but the summer before, I stopped at the Susquehanna River as I drove along it on my way back from Virginia. And, a couple of months later, all the way back in February, I had Mike on the show for, I think it was episode 24 of the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. And he was like, anytime you're in Pennsylvania, stop by. And I happened to be driving through Pennsylvania a month later or a week or so later, and I hit him up and yeah, we've been friends ever since. But yeah, that's definitely I think one of the sort of magical components to what has happened in the past 2 years for me was like going to the Susquehanna and having a moment there and kind of saying my piece with the river. So yeah, I dig it, man. Definitely we're abounding with synchronicities, but I feel like we could keep going for a while. So let's definitely do this again soon, my friend. I see you got a podcast with Andy that you've been doing. So yeah,
we'll be live again tomorrow for number 3. Yeah, Worship in the Storm. Yeah, it's awesome.
Right on.
Yeah, and you and I are going to be on another roundtable next weekend.
Right.
Yeah.
I won't be able to watch. I don't think. I think I'll be working.
Yeah. She's working too much. She's working for herself and she's driving herself nuts.
I'm not driving myself nuts.
No.
It's busy season, People want stuff in the fall.
Yeah.
Hear that.
Preparing for later.
So Mark, do you want to tell the people where they can find all your stuff?
I'd love to. Thanks for having me again. This has been a real fun time, like the past 3 times. And if people like what I got going on, check it out. MyFamilyThinksI'mCrazy.com. Like Todd said at the beginning, AltMediaUnited.com. And then also, we do bonus content on Patreon. And also, if you're already on Rockfin, check us out on Rockfin because I put some of the bonus content there. But really, the majority of it is on the Patreon, and I just put my 100th episode out, and I gave all the patrons spirit animal names. So if that appeals to you, join the club, join the family, and you get a spirit family or a spirit animal name.
Oh, well, that's awesome. Congratulations on the 100th episode. And I want to say I've had quite a few people hit me up that came to know me through my interview on your show. So, hello to everybody who...
Dude, the people who listen to my show are so nice. They always reach out and they do that. They, every guest I've had on has said something similar to that. I'm always surprised and super glad to hear it because it's this is what we're doing now. This is my thing. I love that I'm meeting new people like you, and the fact that people like my show are now listening to your show. It's let's do it. Keep it flowing. There's a reason why they like it.
Yeah, the podcast community is a great one to be a part of.
Yes, it is. All right, so
this one.
What was that?
I said, and thank you for having me in this little micro community here in the now.
Yeah. Well, and I want to thank you so much for coming on. This was a very fun conversation, and I want to thank you for being a part of Alt Media United. And everybody, really go check out Mark's stuff. Join the Patreon and get involved. Get your spirit animal name.
Thank you. Yes.
All right. So we will talk to you all later. Bye, everybody.